Firstly, I want to thank the Hellenic Swedish Chamber of Commerce and the Swedish Embassy for organizing this great forum. And I personally want to thank His Excellency Ambassador Borgström and Ms. Rania Pachapoulou for their significant efforts in promoting Greek and Swedish business collaboration all these years. Now, what I'll try to do in this short presentation is I'll try to explain what offshore wind is, focusing primarily on floating offshore wind is, why it will eventually become the next big thing when it comes to renewables, what are the prospects in Greece and abroad, and what role can Hexicon hopefully play, what leading role in this transition towards a greener economy, towards a greener energy. So, to begin with, what is offshore wind? So when we talk about offshore wind, we usually mean two things. We mean the fixed bottom and the floating. And there are two very much different technologies. Now, the fixed bottom, as the name suggests, are wind turbines that are fixed at the bottom of the sea. And these wind turbines are placed on shallow waters, not more than 50, 55, maximum 60 meters of depth. Floating wind, on the other hand, is when we place a wind turbine, or in Hexicon's case, two wind turbines, on top of a floating foundation. And that can go into much larger depths, and therefore we have more potential. So one question that I often get asked is, why do we need one more variation of energy? We have onshore wind in our mountains. We have a fixed bottom, and now you're talking about floating wind. So why do we need floating wind? And that's a good question. We need floating wind for several reasons. And for the interest of time, I'll mention the four most important here, but there are more than that. And I think these are the reasons that will make floating wind the next big thing when it comes to renewables in the decades to come. So the first reason has to do with demand. There is a very high demand for wind, and that will exponentially increase as we move towards net zero. And simply put, the supply from the onshore and from the fixed bottom is simply not enough. There is a big area up in the North Sea where you usually see those fixed bottom wind farms, but the reality is we are running out of shallow waters there. And in fact, there are very few available, limited, suitable areas for fixed bottom. In fact, more than 80% of the seas worldwide are deep seas. And deep seas mean floating wind. Now, the second reason has to do with the environmental conditions. So the further you go from the shore, the higher the wind speed and the more stable the wind speed, and we need both. Higher wind speeds translate into more energy production, that is kind of self-evident, but stability is also important because we need consistency and predictability in power generation. And one important metric, among others, that show the effectiveness of floating offshore wind is the capacity factor. Now, the capacity factor tells us how much of the maximum total energy that can be produced is actually being produced, and the capacity factor for floating wind is about 60%. And for onshore wind, it hovers around 30%, and for solar PVs, it's about 15 to 20%. So you see 20, 30, 60. So there's a big difference there. The third reason has to do with the environment. And of course, there is a minimum environmental impact footprint when it comes to construction and maintenance phase, but we have some good news also, because according to recent studies, floating wind can create artificial coral reefs that really enhance biodiversity and enhance marine life. And according to the United Nations Environment Program, more than 1/3 of marine species live around coral reefs. So potentially, we can have, through the floating wind, a potential positive environmental externality. And the fourth reason has to do with public approval. So we have presence in more than 10 countries, so we see support from local communities, but I think it's better if we see that in reverse. So far, we haven't confronted the classic not in my backyard problem, which we very often see with onshore wind, which is people demonstrating, sort of revolting because of the wind turbines, and eventually that can lead to long delays and even cancellations of projects. So far we don't have that, and there are various reasons why we don't. I think the most important is that the further you go from the shore, the less visible the wind turbine is. So people from the shore actually cannot see the wind turbines. And if they cannot see them, they don't complain about those. And I think those 4 reasons will lead to a remarkable market acceleration as we go forward. And in fact, this market acceleration has already started. And Mr. Nikos Tsafos touched upon that very briefly in his previous presentation. Europe is quite strong when it comes to offshore wind, especially the Nordics, England, and Scotland. We lately see Asian countries aggressively pursuing policies in favor of floating wind, and in particular Japan, Taiwan, Korea. They are very strong in pushing forward floating wind. And lately the US is trying to catch up, but it is still a couple of steps behind. Now, I believe the potential is really huge, but we still have the challenges, and there are several challenges. I'm assuming we will further on talk about those challenges. I think the 2 most important ones for us is the risk associated with a technology that is, yes, effective, but is not yet as mainstream as onshore wind is, or even as fixed bottom, and therefore a higher, a less tested technology results into higher risk. But from the other hand, from an investment perspective, a higher risk also entails a higher reward, especially for an industry that is on the verge of commercialization. And the second big challenge has to do with our cost structure, and our life gets more complicated with higher interest rates and more persistent inflation. But we are generally, even though we have advanced and progressed over the years, we're generally more expensive than our fixed bottom and onshore turbine cousins. And now I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about Greece, because I really do believe that Greece can become a hub of offshore wind. And we have natural advantages, we have physical advantages that are very important. To begin with, we have some of the best winds, some of the strongest winds in Europe. We have an extended coastline, and therefore many places that we could put and create those offshore wind farms. And for the most part, our waters are deep waters. So something like 80 or 90% are deep waters, and therefore we have a lot of potential. And according to a recent study I read, the maximum that we could produce from floating wind is 40 gigawatt, which is by itself alone to supply, to cover the entire country's electricity needs and even export. So the potential is there. Now, the first legislation bill passed a couple of years ago, so hopefully we see the appetite from the government pushing that forward and setting lofty targets. And also we see the support from the European Union, both funding-wise and policy-wise. So in a nutshell, all the ingredients are here with us. We just now need to play our cards well to make Greece a hub for floating offshore wind that will eventually create thousands of jobs and add value to the economy. So I think that goes beyond the industry itself. Now, let me very briefly talk about who we are and what we do. So Hexicon Power is the Greek subsidiary of Hexicon. Hexicon is a Swedish company that a couple of years ago joined the Stockholm Stock Exchange, the Swedish stock market, and we've been operating for about 15 years. And that makes us, believe it or not, one of the oldest companies in the field, which is very telling of how nascent, of how new this field is. We have a dual business model, and that's part of what differentiates us. So we are both, we have two hats. We are both a project developer and a technology provider. Now, when it comes to project development, we engage from the very early outset in identifying, in finding the right market, then spotting the right sea areas, and then designing and developing these sea areas in order to be ultimately investable. And of course, different legislative approaches requires some kind of flexibility, but we focus on early stage development. Now, if you take a helicopter view and try to see the market, you will see that there are many large and small offshore wind developers. But they only do that. They only focus on that. They are technologically agnostic. They don't commit to a certain technology. They don't own a certain technology. And on the other hand, you will find a number of 60 plus of technology providers, companies that only provide the technology. They engage in no other aspect of the project development. So we do both. And there are significant synergies and advantages in doing both. It's the obvious one that by doing the project development, you enter new markets. And by entering new markets, you have more opportunities to put your technology into practice and improve your technology, but at the same time, get revenues because we have a license model. But the reverse is also true. The fact that we have one of the most cutting-edge, innovative technologies also opens doors to form new alliances, new partnerships. So kind of one helps the other, and therefore I think we have a more sustainable business model in the longer term. And with this business model, we have a presence in more than 10 countries around the world, primarily focused in Europe, because we believe Europe has the highest potential, but we've expanded elsewhere. In fact, our largest project is in Korea. It's a 1.3 gigawatt project. We're doing it in partnership with Shell. So Royal Dutch Shell has 80%, we have 20%, and we are seeking new opportunities to expand elsewhere. So because I'm running out of time, before I close, I want to say a few things about our technology. So our innovation is that you put 2 wind turbines on top of a single floating foundation. And that is important primarily for 2 reasons. One is that by having 2 wind turbines instead of 1, on a certain sea area, on a certain sea plot, you can produce more energy. Okay? And that going forward, as we move into commercialization, that is important. But at the same time, exactly because we have 2 wind turbines on a single floating foundation, we use less cabling, we use less metal, we use less of a lot of things, and therefore we are more cost efficient. So we are able to produce more energy more efficiently at a less cost per megawatt hour. And this is how it works. So there is a triangular steel structure, okay? And that's quite big. It's 170 to 100 meters, so it looks small, but it's quite big. And on the left hand and on the right hand top corner, you have the wind turbines, and on the middle, underneath that, you have the mooring system attached to a turret. Now that helps the platform rotate, and therefore it can capture wind from whatever side it comes, and therefore it can capture as much wind as possible. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to pause it here. I think it's a very high potential place to be. We are talking about an unlimited, untapped resource, and I hope that going forward, governments will also support this effort if really they want to walk the walk and pursue renewables and they really mean what they say. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chatzigakis, and thank you very much for explaining a subject that is not very well known for a lot of even the engineering world here in Greece at least.